Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for our last but by no means least keynote session at the RM EduSummit 21, what promises to be a thought-provoking presentation this afternoon. In just a moment, we'll be hearing from Dr. Pedro de Breccia, educational scientist and mythbuster. This is all focused on the use of technology in education post-COVID-19. Should you have any questions throughout the session, please do submit them at any time through the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen or in the chat. As many of these as possible will be answered in the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So for now, I will hand over to Pedro. Enjoy.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Pedro de Breccia, and I'm a mythbuster. I co-authored the book Urban Myths About Learning Education. I co-wrote it with Paul Kirchner and Kasper Hulshoff. You can also see my website. If you have any complaints about me, could happen, you can put it in the chat or in the Q&A, but you can also put it on Twitter. Do mention me, then I know about it. Now, after the first book about urban myths about learning and education, I received two kinds of questions. The first kind of question was, yeah, you've dispelled all those myths, but what works? Well, this has led to this book, The Ingredients for Great Teaching. And the other kind of question was, yeah, you've checked all of that, but what about this? So we had to write a new book, More Urban Myths About Learning and Education. Now, I will be discussing education and technology, but to be clear, as a kind of disclaimer, I believe in education and I believe in teachers. But do I believe in technology in education? The answer there is, it depends. Let me make this clear with two examples. If we look at the effect of hybrid learning or hybrid teaching, then quite often we see the learning loss of hybrid learning. This is one of the most damning slides that I will show you today. There will be much better news in a few seconds, but if you look to this slide of a study in the United States, well, this is learning loss for you. You can see that when the United States went into lockdown in March last year, we see that all results of all children except the children from a wealthy background dropped. Now, on the other side, you also have what we called personalized review. And I wanted to check to see if you are alive, but also to test your prior knowledge. Is there anybody in this room? It's not a free ride, so you have to react. Has anybody in this room heard about personalized review? Just say yes or no in the chat, please. Thank you, Lucy. Any other people alive out there? Oh, where can we type? Okay. No. Oh, I'm glad then I can learn something new to you, teach you something new. And to understand what personalized review is, I have to go back a very long time to 1885. In 1885, Ebbinghaus figured out what the amount of learning loss is, forgetting after 20 minutes, after an hour. For instance, after 20 minutes, you remember only 60% of what you learned 20 minutes before. And based on this, we know that one of the strongest ways of teaching is spaced repetition, repetition with bigger spaces between the repetitions. Now, if you look at technology, this is a 2014 study with three groups. Group A, Group B, Group C. Group A, they received what we call massed teaching without repetition. So in the first class, you get information for the first class. In the second class, you just get the second class, and so on. The second group received generic spaced teaching with repetition in the second class of the first class, with repetition of the second and the first class in the third, and so on. But everybody received the same repetition. Group B, the generic spaced group, outperformed Group A by 6.5%, which is nice, but not huge. But if you look at the third group, well, this was the personalized spaced or the personalized review group. I like to call it the Amazon group because everybody who bought something online, for instance, on Amazon, they all received the same kind of information. People who bought this also bought this. In this case, they used a similar algorithm to adapt the repetition to the mistakes of a child. For instance, you made this mistake, you also made this mistake, so we will have a different personalized repetition. Group C outperformed Group B by 10% and outperformed the non-repetition group by 16.5%. Now, this is one study, and actually this study was done with adults learning Spanish, but this study has been replicated over and over again. And what we've noticed is that it always seems to work. It works best for children under 18 for mathematics, but it works for every single group. So this means technology can be good and bad. Yes. Actually, this relates to what is called the first law on technology from Kranzberg. And what does this law say? Technology is neither good nor bad, nor it's neutral. So today, what I want to discuss with you is the bad, the better, and I'll end with the future. I hope you like it because I can't change it anymore, but I promise you it will be very interesting. Now, let's start off with some bad reasons to use technology. For instance, a very popular idea is we have what we call digital natives. Our children really like technology, so we need to use technology. No, that's a bad reason because there's no such thing as a digital native. And if they multitask, they will learn less. Also, there is a kind of idea that technology will change everything. Now, having high hopes in technology, well, it has a long tradition. It has been a long tradition. Did the way our pupils learn change because they use technology? The answer is sadly enough, no. And if you ask now, really? Well, it's not about a different way of learning. Instead, it's about keeping their attention. And this is for sure the case while learning online. For instance, take this study. This is a study done by MIT, and the T stands for technology. They used 3 groups, Group A, Group B, Group C. And they were all being taught in the same way by the same teachers. They had to fulfill the same requirements. They were exactly the same, but Group A wasn't allowed to use any kind of technology. Group B, they were allowed to use technology, but the technology was limited to be relevant for the actual class being taught. And the third group, well, in the third group, they could use technology the way they want. They could use it freely. Now, I think that the scientists knew that Group A would outperform Group C. This was the case. But the most interesting question was, what would be the results of Group B? And I think that the researchers expected Group B to be quite similar to Group A. Sadly enough, that wasn't the case. Group B was not that dissimilar to Group C. So only the group without any technology in the classroom was outperforming. But wait, what was the real conclusion? The real conclusion is we can't multitask, which we have known for a while. Really, it's bad. Even driving with a mobile phone through your speakers is just very dangerous. Another conclusion is multitasking can be really bad for learning. Another conclusion, don't use technology in education, because you have to know something else about those 3 groups. They were being taught in traditional classrooms in a traditional way. That's not bad, you know. There are different ways of teaching, and every teaching has pros and cons. But in this case, if you use a traditional approach to teaching and you bring in technology, quite often then the pupils start to multitask and they will learn less. So a possible conclusion is don't use technology in certain educational settings. Okay, Now, having high hopes in technology has been a long tradition, but worrying about technology, this has been a long tradition too. And I have a question. Again, you can answer in the chat. Is there any former patient in the public that has suffered from radiotismus? Is there anybody in this room who can share with us if they've had radiotismus? Nobody seems to answer. Maybe I can ask another question. Who knows what radiotismus is? You can answer yes or no, please. Yeah. This was a very impossible question to answer, I have to admit. Radiotismus is a disease first described almost 100 years ago by doctors when the first radios become popular. Radiotismus was a disease that they thought that existed for sure with men, not with women, with men. When men who separated themselves from their families to listen to the radio, they were afraid that they would start hearing voices. And this disease, this mental disease, was called radiotismus. And in the 50s of last century, radiotismus became popular again, but then not with men, but with women. And to be sure, I'm not saying this. It's not my opinion. I'm just describing what they thought in the 50s. Then they were afraid that women who listened too much to the radio would neglect their house, their chores. Yeah. I've taken this idea of radiotismus, I've taken this mental disease from a review of 100 years of fake diseases based on technology. Actually, there's no such thing, but it's still a very popular idea to get rid of technology because maybe it's bad. Most of the time, it's not that bad at all. So after the bad, let's move on to the better. Some better reasons to use technology. And for me, one of the most important reasons to use technology in the classroom is actually because children aren't digital natives at all. Because if you are discussing the digital natives myth, we do think our children are born this way. I have to warn you, there's some extreme footage on the next slide. Are you ready? Have a look. Okay, this is just a joke, but we tend to think our children are really good at using technology. In fact, that's not the case. In 2001, Mark Prensky coined the phrase digital native, and the parents of the digital natives, children who are born in a digital world and who are very good in using technology, their parents were called digital immigrants. Now, myself as a researcher together with Paul Kirsten, we've reviewed most of the studies published since 2001, and this is a total myth. You have to make a distinction between the button use, the technology side, and the content side. And what we've noticed, yes, it's true. Youngsters are very fast in figuring out how a device works. But if we are discussing the content side, the strategic side of the story, then actually 30 years old, those so-called digital immigrants, 40 years old, are much, much better than children or youngsters. What is more difficult than ever today is searching, finding, and checking information. This is a report that was published last week. Only 47% of the 15-year-old children, youngsters in the OECD countries see the difference between fact and opinion. I think this is really bad. That's an opinion. The 47% is a fact. Actually, the number that was published by the OECD in 2018 was much worse. They are getting a bit better, not getting better, but the new result is a bit more optimistic. But even, there's a study from 2017, even if you look at university students, honor students in the best universities of the United States, no pun intended, they often don't see a difference between a fact and an opinion online. And even the same students, this is a study by Weinberg and McCrew, even university students often forget to check the source. So if we don't teach them how to work with technology, they will remain really bad at using technology. And we need those tech-savvy children in society. Other good reasons. Do you know what the main reason for teachers is to use technology? To prepare classes. Yeah, this sounds strange, but this is actually based on the work of Larry Cuban. And in 2009, already in 2009, he thought, if I want to see the best use of technology in education, I have to go to Silicon Valley because technology is cheap over there. A lot of companies invest money in schools. I will see the best use of technology in those schools. What he found was that a lot of teachers were actually using technology, but not in the classroom. They used it at home to prepare their classes. But quite often, teachers were afraid to use technology in the classroom, not because they thought they were not good at it, but they weren't sure about the effects. Would it have a positive effect on learning? Luckily, we know now that, for instance, look at personalized review. There are examples, great examples, to use technology in the classroom that has a positive effect on learning. But still, another, and I know the company that is organizing this session is also investing a lot of energy in comparative judgment. I've done research on comparative judgment myself, and it's true. What you can do with comparative judgment is great, is faster, and quite often more reliable for learning or for evaluating, but you can only do it in a great way by using technology. Maybe personalized review that I mentioned in the introduction can work too. You also have something like what we call dual coding. And sorry if you have to say no again, then I'll explain it because I have too much stuff to tell you. Do you know dual coding? Just mention yes or no in the chat so I can adapt to your prior knowledge. Okay, I see a lot of no's. Glad to see you're alive. But the good news is I'll teach you then, okay? Keep your keyboard closed because I'll ask you a question in a few seconds. I could explain a second question in a few seconds. I could explain dual coding or dual channel theory this way, but that's much too complicated, so I'll do it in a different way. We take two groups, Group A, Group B. Okay, Group A, pay attention. What they will see is a video with an experiment in the video and a voiceover explaining the experiment. This is what Group A is being shown. Okay, Group B, They are seeing exactly the same video. You see the images of the experiment, the voiceover, but we add one element: subtitles in the same language. Okay, so group A is without subtitles in the same language. Group B is with the subtitles in the same language. My question now for you is, which group will remember the most after class? With group B or without group A subtitles in the same language? Answer in the chat, please. Okay, we have two answers already, and they are contradicting each other. For the people who are watching this video afterwards, you're missing out on a learning experience, but glad you are watching this video. Most of the people are answering with subtitles. Sadly enough, this is incorrect. On average, Group B will remember 30% less than Group A. And now I will explain you why. The basic idea is that we have two channels in our working memory. A channel for words, a channel for pictures. And if you are using both channels, your pupils or students will learn more. This is great. But if we look at the word channel, well, words can be both in print or sound. But if you use them both, then they will learn less, because we can't read and listen at the same time. So if you overload a channel, for instance, the word channel, then your students will remember less. So word in print or sound plus image, great. Word in print and sound plus image, they will remember on average 30% less. But be careful, I've said two things, and you can check the video afterwards to check if I've really said them, but I did. I've said on average because it depends on the topic. For instance, if you're learning a language, quite important is to share the sound together with word so they learn how to pronounce it. In this case, combining word, print, and sound is not that bad. And also, I've said subtitles in the same language. If you have a different language in the subtitles, forget everything I've said. But this is also important if you're thinking about how to prepare a presentation. Well, the basic rule is keep it simple, stupid. So don't do this. This is an eyesight seeing test. Oh, that's a difficult word to pronounce in English. This is slightly better. So again, it's not only using technology or not, it's also how you are using technology. But I have a last big chapter closely related to the topic at hand. How can we use technology for learning by play? I have to make a little detour now, because learning by play goes back a very long time. Even in ancient Egypt times, we already had battle dolls. And dolls and figurines are probably the oldest form of toys. There are a lot of other toys with some very old roots. The rattled marbles, rope skipping. Rope skipping is really old, trust me. The stick horse, miniature furniture. I've seen miniature furniture from centuries ago. Actually, the thing is that while the world changed for a very long time, toys have remained the same. Well, until the last 150 years. Now, there's something a very interesting thesis in science, is that because the world changed, play has changed. Seems reasonable. And we've seen that childhood has become much more important. And we've seen changes in economy and changes in technology. seems reasonable, but I want to go one step further. Johan Huizinga, who wrote a very important work on play, the Homo Ludens, a study of the play element in culture, he states that the world also has changed because of play. And Huizinga describes 5 characteristics of play. I'll give them to you. And actually, this is a very bad slide if you remember dual coding, but I want you to make sure you have it on screen too if you switch off your loudspeakers. 5 characteristics are: play is free. In fact, playing is freedom. Play is never ordinary or real life. It's not real, it's play. And play is distinct from ordinary life, both as to locality and duration. If you watch children play, for instance, that they are a family, their days are much, much faster, trust me. But also play creates order. Actually, play is a kind of order, and play demands order absolute and supreme. And 5, play is connected with no material interest and no profit can be gained from it. Now, if you see those 5 characteristics, then it seems there is a contradiction between the first and the fourth characteristic. On the one hand, Huizinga states play is free, is in fact freedom. On the other side, he states play creates order, is order, and order seems the opposite of free or freedom. Now, we have to make a distinction between structured play and free play. And to explain this, I have 2 examples. If you look at Lego, if you buy a box of Lego and you build it from scratch following the instructions, this is what we call structured play. And after a while, quite often to the horror of the parents, when children mess up everything and start building something completely different, this is free play. You can do this also with other examples from a not that well-known company. The Bebot. First, you start to learn how to program it. That is structured play. But then you can make the biggest complex situation, and children love it, to have free play. Because both structured and free play are important. To sum it up, structured play is actually learning the rules, learning new ways to handle technology, to handle toys. And free play is experimenting, or is what we call bending the rules. Now, I don't know if you know the images from this video, but this is taken from Méliès, who was one of the very first filmmakers. He learned a lot of magic tricks because his job was originally being a magician. But then when new technology came, he tried to use those rules he learned from being a magician in filmmaking, inventing a whole new world of magic tricks on camera. And as rules change through life, well, free play and structured play alternate. And much, much more is possible with technology and education. But what is the difference between good and bad use of technology? Or what is the difference between personalized review that I discussed at the beginning of my talk and what we were often doing because of Corona? Well, what we have been doing because of Corona was quite often based, well, it was because of necessity. While we know that personalized review was based on cognitive science. So it's very important not to do anything, trying out everything without knowing what could work based on science. 2 extra thoughts about this, just to give you some food for thought after my talk, but maybe you can ask me questions later on, because I've made a bet with Lucy that in my talk there would be a lot of questions. Please help me win this bet. First extra thought is education will change technology often more than technology will ever change education. Think about it. What is a typical way that teachers use technology? We often think we will give teachers technology and their ways of teaching will change. But quite often they find other ways of using technology to keep using the same methods. A second thought for food for thought, technology doesn't change how we learn that fast. And this is quite often an idea people have, but it's not backed by science. So I've discussed the bad, I've discussed the better. Now you know that I'm very much in favor of using technology in the classroom and different kinds of technology, not only screen-based technology, but all kinds of technology to make children actually adapt to modern life, but also to learn them the rules of technology so they can bend the rules of technology. But now let's have a look at the future. And I won't take a big leap. I won't be discussing things like artificial intelligence and virtual reality. I'm not even mentioning some ideas that maybe one day we will take a pill to learn how to speak French or Spanish or whatever. No, let's have a look to the nearby future. How can we make sure that COVID-19 won't become this for educational technology? One more such victory and we are undone. Actually, what we've seen from TeacherTap in the UK, but also TeacherTap in the Netherlands or in Belgium, we have TeacherTap too. And what we've seen from a lot of studies is, yes, every teacher around the world has been using technology a lot, but at the same time, a lot of teachers, pupils, parents are so fed up with it. Our task for the next few years is to use technology even in a better way and for sure more wisely. Or in short, technology is neither good nor bad, but when you use it, it's also never neutral. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pedro, for that thought-provoking talk there. Lots of food for thought for all of us. So if you haven't already posted a question, we don't have any yet, I am more than prepared to lose this bet against Pedro today. Please do challenge him. Any questions around technology in education, pre-COVID, post-COVID, the future, please post them in the chat or the Q&A box now.
Well, Lucy, I know a first question is often very difficult. So I will answer a first question myself because I often get the question, how can you do that strange thing with your slides behind your back? Because it's free software and you can use it in Teams, Zoom, wherever you want. I only bought a green screen and I don't know, but maybe you're selling it too. And then you can use OBS Studio. I'll put the name in the chat, and in this way you can do exactly the same what I'm doing.
Brilliant. I think it's disappeared. Let me just check.
Yeah, I saw a question.
Yeah, so a question from Mark. Thank you, Mark. So tech overload is a real issue, then it seems, for students and staff. So is tech overload a real issue for students and staff?
I think so, but you can't blame technology. I have to explain this. What we've seen, and I've been keeping track on it in many different countries, a lot of countries have switched to use technology because it was needed because of the situation. And quite often it asks a lot of work, because if you want to use technology in school for learning, you need a time to prepare in a good way. But quite often, because of the COVID situation, this wasn't the case. So what we received is that teachers were working, I can't say this online, I guess, but working their ass off just to make it possible, not having enough time to do it well straight away. At the same time, also students and pupils, because of lockdown, were forced to use technology in and out. This is not an optimal way to use technology for learning. In the best situation, you need a perfect blend. The right question you need to ask is, what works best with technology? For instance, spaced repetition. Technology works like a charm. Learning how to code, you need technology. A lot of more examples that I've also shared in my talk. But also there are other elements, for instance, working on a relationship, key for learning. Having talks among each other. Maybe that's a perfect moment not to use technology. But in this case, because of the situation, a lot of those things that technology isn't the best option for, well, they still were forced to use it. So I think that a lot of people have been thinking that now technology will become the new normal. And the good news is we've learned a lot. But at the same time, because a lot of students and teachers are fed up with it, we will have to fight an uphill battle to get the right balance, to get the right blend of using technology in the classroom.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark, for your question. So we have another question now from Matt. He says, "Hi, Pedro. In relation to technology, do you think that a child learns more from structured play or free play, or does one form the basis for the other?"
You need them both. It's like I said, through structured play, you learn them new skills, but they have to figure out what they can do with these new skills through free play. So you need a balance of both. So I think that quite often parents nowadays are using too much structured play because they want to learn the children something new. This is good, but you also need to leave them on their own so they can do awful things while playing, but figuring out new stuff. So you need them both. The other option, if you only use free play, what some people also say that should be the option, then you'll get segregation because some smart children, some more creative children will figure out new stuff, but a lot of children won't. So if you only use free play, you make the differences between children bigger, quite often related also to social economic background. So you for sure need both of them.
Thank you, Pedro. We have a couple more to go. So Sarah is asking, "Technology can sometimes be scary and intimidating for teachers. How do we keep it simple?"
Um, that's a $1 million question. Um, I think that the key element is here support and professional development. Quite often, schools invest a lot of money in the technology itself, but that's just the starting point. If you introduce technology, but you don't teach teachers how to use it, if you don't invest as a school in time for teachers visiting each other to see what they are doing with the technology, then you'll end up with teachers remaining scared of technology and what Larry Cuban described as oversold and underused. There are a lot of possibilities teachers have to see from colleagues, not only from trainers, but have to see from colleagues to say, oh, is it that easy? Yes, it's that easy. Let me try this too. So I think if you bought something new, good for you. But then as a school, you have to invest a lot of time and energy in supporting your teachers, not only with the button side of things, but also with the didactical side of things. And one of the cheapest way is having teachers visit each other to see what they are doing with it. Sometimes you can get some input from outside outside school to give them some new input, structured play, and then have teachers also some free play with the technology. And I see similarities.
Thank you, Sarah, for your question. So next up is a question from Simon. Given that most jobs later in life, oh, I've lost it. Here we go. Apologies. Given that most jobs later in life involve technology, surely teachers are preparing pupils for later life by introducing technology earlier in their education.
Well, this is a big point of discussion between some educational scientists, or actually educational thinkers. A quite popular idea, but I've checked it and I couldn't find any substance to it. But a very popular idea is, if you look at the children of the big bosses of Silicon Valley, they often go to schools without technology. I've tried to fact check it, but I couldn't find a support. There are only two articles, one in the New York Times and one 7 years later rewriting the article from the New York Times. So I don't have any evidence for it. But it's true, some schools, like Waldorf schools, state that children can't use technology before the age of 14. And actually, when I look at the research, for instance, the EU Kids study, or the mobility kids study also done in the UK and the rest of Europe, contradicts this. If you keep children at a young age away from technology, then they will use technology for sure, even behind your back. And if you don't prepare it for them, they will have much more negative effects of what they are doing. Actually, when you teach them how to use technology, quite often they will try more and they will run in more danger, but the negative effect will be smaller. So that's why we need to teach our children to use technology, and also to make sure that technology isn't that scary for them neither.
Thank you, Simon. I've definitely lost this bet. Another question now from Andre. In your view, can technology limit unstructured play because of the rules it brings to the game?
Well, this depends on what technology. For instance, take a sandbox game like Minecraft. Minecraft is a sandbox game with almost no rules, with a lot of liberties, and so you can see that there is a lot of free play in this game. While there are other forms of technology that are much more limited. But trust me, if you introduce them to those rules and you have enough prior knowledge, then some children, even with strict rules, can bend them in very interesting ways. But it will be much, much harder. One thing is important. Then you also have to give the impression to the children that there is more possible than meets the eye. If they only are forced in a very strict carcan and you never allow them to have any free play, then, Andre, you're right.
Thank you, Pedro. So a comment now from Mark, which we'd like to get your thoughts on, Pedro. Technology is a bit like fire. If used right, it can solve a lot of problems. If used wrong or misunderstood, it can cause more problems than you're trying to solve.
Yeah, it's true, and that's actually a kind of rephrasing the first law of Kranzberg. Technology is nor good nor bad, but if you use it, it's never neutral. And to give you also some food for thought, everybody, in this case, quite often we don't think enough about why we use technology or why we don't use technology. And I think both questions need a lot of thought, and for sure try to do it as a team, because maybe you've thought about some elements, but if you bring in a colleague or your whole team to discuss, will we use this technology? Why will we use it? What will be the subject to use it in? Why won't we use it in this way? This kind of discussions will lower the fear, but also make the application of technology in classrooms much, much better.
Thank you. And finally, one last question from Sarah. In your opinion, what is the biggest myth currently about technology?
What is the biggest myth? I think the biggest myth is And I'll give a long explanation. I'll try to make it as short as possible. But I think the biggest myth is this technology will change everything. If you look at the history, I'm very much interested in the history of education. And there are two seemingly rules in the history of education. The first rule is that the grammar of education always remain the same. And what is the grammar of education? A person who knows more about a certain subject will go on a trip with other people who know less about the subject, so they learn about it. This is something we have tried, that has been the case for the past millennia. That's the first rule. The grammar of education is quite often fixed. Sometimes it can be technology between the teacher and the pupil, but still the mechanisms remain the same. At the same time, there is a second rule. We try to forget the first rule. And for the past decades, we've seen a lot of people using technology, thinking this technology will bend the first rule, applying for the second rule. And except one school in France, École 42, it never seems to work.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much, Pedro, for your session today. That does bring us to the end. If you do have any questions, any further questions you'd like to ask Pedro, then please, by all means, track him down on Twitter, on social media. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to take any questions after the session. It's now bringing us to the end of RM EduSummit 21. So thank you for all of you for joining us this week.